Hello, everybody. The webinar will begin very shortly. So good afternoon from London, everybody, but good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are joining us from, because I know we have people coming in from all parts of the world today. And welcome to our webinar today, which is all about how behavioural insight nudges can solve policy problems. So it's called When Push Comes to Shove. I'm Siobhan Benita. I'm a former UK senior civil servant, and I'm delighted to be chairing this webinar on behalf of Global Government Forum, which is a publishing house that serves civil servants and public servants all around the world. Now, in terms of that topic today, over 200 governments and public sector institutions around the world have embraced the use of behavioural insights, also known as nudges, to inform the delivery of a host of public services and policy ideas. By using insights from disciplines such as psychology and social science, governments have been able to use these nudges in a range of areas such as healthy eating drives and tackling unpaid tax, just to name a couple. But this approach hasn't always proved to be successful in other policy areas. So today we're going to be looking at several aspects of this. We're going to be looking at the use of behavioural insights in government, examining the best use in policy delivery, and how public servants should consider using them in future. And we're going to be asking questions such as, how should governments try to understand public behaviour to assist in their policy development? The areas of public policy where behavioural insights are proving to be most useful, and the best practice in using behavioural insights to develop policy, but also to measure the effectiveness of policy interventions. We've got three fantastic speakers with us here today, and in a moment I'm going to introduce our speakers and invite them to give some opening remarks to set the scene for our conversation. But this really is a conversation, and we want you to send in your questions and your comments. So on whichever device you are using, you should see on the bottom of your screen somewhere a Q&A function. Please use that Q&A function at any point from now on to message in your questions. And once we've heard from our speakers, we'll get through as many of those questions as we can before the end of the webinar. But now let's turn to our fantastic panel. So first we will hear from Susan Calvert, who is Managing Director at the Behavioural Economics Team, also known as BETA, at the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet in Australia. With a scientific background and experience in developing innovative policy solutions, Susan and her team are focused on improving the lives of Australians by generating and applying evidence from the behavioural and social sciences to better understand policy problems and identify what works. Her team hopes to empower Australians and support informed decision-making with people-centred policies and simpler, faster and more accessible public services. Then we head over to France, where we'll hear from Dr. Mariam Chammat, who is Senior Advisor at the Behavioural Insights Unit in the Interministerial Directorate for Public Transformation, which sits in the Department of Public Service and Transformation over in France. Mariam works to strengthen evidence-based policymaking by developing and piloting projects between policymakers and researchers. Her work translates findings and methods from cognitive and behavioural sciences into improvements in public policies and programmes. Mariam holds a PhD in affective and cognitive neuroscience, where she studied various ways in which emotions can bias perception. And in 2015, she co-founded a think tank where she has developed de-biasing programmes aimed at improving critical thinking skills. And then last but by no means least, we will hear from Ivan Budassi, who is the former Director of Behavioural Sciences and Public Policies Unit at the Secretariat for Development Planning and Federal Competitiveness in the Ministry of Economy in Argentina. And he held this position from 2021 until March this year. Ivan has been a behavioural sciences advisor under several municipal, regional and national governments and held executive offices in federal and provincial revenue services. He's also a consultant at the Development Bank of Latin America and other international institutions. And Ivan has also authored numerous articles and is a public speaker on a range of issues, including behavioural sciences. So I'm sure you'll agree we have a fantastic panel with us here today. Sadly, Andre Mediano, who was from Chile, did want to join us, but he sends his apologies because he's had a family emergency, so he is unable to join. But please do, as I say, take this opportunity to put all of your questions to our great panel. It's a fantastic opportunity to do that. So without further ado, Susan, I'm going to come over to you and invite you to give our first opening remarks.
Thank you, Siobhan, and thank you to the Global Government Forum for bringing us all together and to get the opportunity to discuss such an interesting topic. So as Siobhan said, I'm from Beta in Australia. We're a team of psychologists, economists, social researchers and behavioural scientists operating right from the centre of government in the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet. And we work in partnership with the policy teams across the Australian government using behavioural insights to solve policy problems. We're currently working on a huge range of projects to solve some really high priority issues for government, responding to the cost of living pressures, which I'm sure is a top priority in governments all across the world at the moment, achieving our net zero targets by 2050, similarly a top priority worldwide, meeting our workforce and skill needs, improving women's economic security, supporting preventative health measures, and also addressing entrenched disadvantage and supporting our most vulnerable to access our services. So we work by getting involved really early in the policy cycle. And so we're helping with understanding policy problems. We apply a behavioural lens to help develop policy solutions. And then we rigorously test those policy interventions to find out what works. Our methods, our literature reviews, data analysis, qualitative and quantitative research, including survey experiments, randomised control trials. We do consultations, forums, and impact evaluations, just to mention a few. And as an example of when Behavioural Insights works, Beta used Behavioural Insights to help Australians keep their betting within their budget. You might know that Australians have one of the highest gambling losses on a per capita basis in the world, which is not our best result. But when we went into COVID lockdown, there was quite a dramatic increase in the amount of online gambling, which of course is much easier to access, and particularly when you're in lockdown. The government wanted to make sure our at-risk gamblers were making informed decisions about their betting. So what Beta did was to partner with some leading academics from 3 universities around Australia. And we used behavioural science to determine whether providing participants with information about their total online betting would actually reduce or influence their spending. We, of course, being behavioural scientists, targeted their cognitive biases, which are known to affect gambling decisions. And then we ran a study to simulate gambling. It was actually an online game which showed participants a series of horse races, and they were invited to bet on those. And we tested whether providing information to some of those control groups and the non-control groups to see whether providing them different information and in different formats would actually influence how much they would gamble. We provided information on their winnings and total losings, and we provided it in different formats through a randomised control trial and to find out what works. And what we found was that activity statements helped consumers make decisions about their online gambling by reducing the amount that they bet. And that was an amount of 7.6%, and on an average, and then even more for the at-risk gamblers. So behavioural insights in this instance were used to inform government policy, and they resulted in regulation at state and territory government level right across Australia that now makes it mandatory for online wagering companies to provide monthly activity statements to their customers, and they use the design that was tested as the most successful in our trial. And now that those regulations have been implemented for over a year, we are now measuring in the real world the actual change in behaviour using statements. So we find that many complex problems in Australia have a behavioural element, and in particular those that relate to take-up of services, access in an equitable way, helping Australians make informed decisions, and designing policy with people in mind. We're not so much looking for nudges, but we are applying a broader behavioural science lens to our policy problems. And we help the government approach policy problems from a people-centred and an evidence-informed perspective. And sometimes this ends up with a narrow behavioural intervention, which we refer to as a nudge, but usually it ends up with a broader behavioural research informing a broader policy response. So in answer to your original question, Siobhan, the question of this panel discussion, I know for a fact that behavioural insights can help solve policy problems, and BETA is certainly called on a lot to do that in Australia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. Great place to start. You set out, I think, quite clearly right at the beginning how this type of approach can help across a broad range of policy areas. So as you say, everything from the cost of living crisis to transitioning to net zero, and kind of helping to address some of those big, deep-rooted equality issues as well. Couple of things that you mentioned, which I'm sure our audience and other speakers will pick up on: the need to be early in the policy process, to be part of the early development, and then that rigorous testing of approaches as well to really understand what works. Really interesting to have that use case of the gambling policy and how that's gone on to influence regulation as well. So really interesting to hear that. And then, as you say, a lot of complex problems and issues around take-up of policies all have a behavioural element as part of them. So you can use these approaches in ways maybe where people wouldn't necessarily think that, and it might not be a nudge at the end, but it's something that informs that broader people-centred policy approach. Thank you so much, Susan. Great way to start. Lots of food for thought, I'm sure, and our audience, I'm sure, will have lots of questions in their minds. Mariam, we're coming over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be presenting the work we do in our behavioral team in France. The examples that Susan gave and the approach that is used in Australia is really similar to the one we use in France. So it's very, there's a lot of complementarity. Perhaps just to give you an idea of where our team sits and what we do more broadly, if we look at the next slide. So our Behavioural Insights team, on the next slide, you can see that is embedded within a bigger innovation team that has different missions. So basically, we accompany major innovation projects in general in France. We also work on empowering public servants with new methodologies. Our approach specifically of evidence-based policymaking is one of them. We also work a lot on strengthening public innovation networks and contributing to and designing new forms of governments in general as an innovation team. Now, if we go to the next two slides, we can see that behavioral science is a part of it, as you can see, and I'm part of that small behavioral science team. But we also have a design service team, a team that works more on co-constructing with civil society, and a community of research-based open innovation team. And all of these combined policies come together, not always systematically on all projects, but a lot of these work together on different projects to deliver the most user-centered solutions and approaches. Now, if you go on the next slides, sorry, the next one as well. If I'm going to focus on behavioral insights and show you a little bit more about give you examples of what we do specifically. The idea generally is that if you're trying to achieve outcomes and you're trying to create solutions that depend on how people behave, then it's really important to understand how people behave. And so this is why we use different approaches from behavioral science in general, so cognitive psychology, anthropology, economics, and combine those with experimental methods and impact evaluation. So exactly as Susan mentioned, randomized control trials to address public policy issues. So these are the different types of expertise that we have in our team. On the next slide, what you'll see is the typology of our project. So we have different types of projects. Ideally, as Susan said, the best case scenario for us is to be implicated from the beginning of the policy cycle. So before a law, even a regulation comes out, it's really interesting to consult behavioral science, because this means that you might, from the beginning, avoid all problems that will come up later of compliance or things that you've missed. So for example, on one specific project, which I find extremely interesting, is one we did on a repairability index, whereby products such as phones, computers, and other electronic products have an index from 1 to 10, and it gives you the score of how repairable this phone is, for example. And what we worked on is, before the law came out and the regulation, we worked on what is the type of visual index that will be taken into account by consumers, and starting which number or which color will they start moving towards more repairable products. So we worked on that 3 years ago, and we made a recommendation based on a very big randomized control trials on real life consumers on a website where people had to make purchases, and we saw if the repairability was actually taken into account. And what we did now, 3 years later, is to see whether there was a shift in behavior 3 years after implementing this, whether it changed consumers' behaviors with real data from people who sell these products. And we also saw, very interestingly, the effect that it had also on the producers of these phones and computers, because we saw that there's a shift in what they actually put on the market, and it changed their behavior as well. So this is one example, but we also work on things like simplification of forms, of laws. We had a whole project of simplifying a big number of administrative forms and making sure that users actually understand the behavior and understand the language and know exactly what to do once they receive those forms. Another part of our project, as you see on number 5, is understanding problems of non-uptake or non-compliance with certain policies and programs. So for example, we've worked on things like a program on the cultural pass, which was put in France a couple of years ago. And this is addressed to young people from 16 to 19, and they can benefit from a certain amount to access cultural activities. But there was a large amount, 20%, that still did not use this cultural pass, even though it was really completely beneficial to them. So try to understand the barriers and find solutions to that using randomized control trials as well. So and finally, one thing we can do also is do an ex-ante evaluation of a program to see whether it worked or not. So this gives you a very broad idea of the different types of projects that we do. And if we move to the next slide, you'll see that it's very cross-sector. We work in topics that have to do with the environment, with health, with economy, education. I mean, it's very, very large. And I'll come back to this slide in the end and keep it during the questions, so that if you have any questions specific to any area, we can look at that in detail. I'm just going to go on 1 or 2 examples just so you can see exactly how a project works. So if you move to the next slide, you'll see this is what we did on the repairability index. We designed different types of repairability visuals. We tested them, first of all, in a lab study on 2,000 consumers. We went from 10 prototypes to 4. And then, to 3. And then what we did is those three final prototypes, we tested them in real life on 140,000 consumers to see which is the one that will change the behavior the most, which is the one that will get people to buy the most repairable product. And this is the one we recommended, and it's the one you can see in France on all products since 2021. If you move to the next slide, I'll give you another example. So this is a project we did with the Haute Autorité de Santé, which is a health authority that makes recommendations to doctors. This means that the recommendations of this authority have to be applied by doctors, because it's a big council of experts that make these medical recommendations. And so they came to see us because they had the recommendation on the systematic screening of patients, of women, to see if they were domestic abuse. I mean, they were victims of domestic abuse. This means that doctors had to systematically ask their patients whether they had been victims of abuse. As you can imagine, this question is very delicate. There was a bit of barriers. Doctors were not always feeling comfortable asking this question because it meant that they had to change the relationship with their patients. It also meant that if the answer was yes, they had to find solutions, take more time during the whole consultation. So it was quite difficult. And also one of the big problems is, as you can see on the left hand of my slide, the documents that made these recommendations were quite long. They were complicated for the doctors to read because they don't necessarily have the time to go and read and be convinced that they have to do this. So what we worked on is what you see in the middle. We made a very simplified form that summarizes this recommendation, but it's not only a summary, it's also a summary that addresses the arguments and the barriers that they gave us, telling us, I don't want to do this because it's not my role, because I would know if my patients were concerned, I don't know what to do. And those are the things we addressed. So we showed them the statistics of how many of their patients are concerned, why it's their role, and why they have this privileged exchange with their patients that really creates a trust relationship. We also gave them all the numbers and the links to go to if the answer was yes. And finally, what we designed, as you can see in the middle as well, is a small questionnaire that is put in the waiting rooms. This way, the patients can fill it before entering the doctor's office. And this way, it creates an icebreaker, and they can answer the question without it being addressed directly and very frontally by the doctors. And we did a randomized control trial on around 1,500 physicians with a control condition where we sent nothing, but just asked them if they wanted to participate eventually to the study, and then an intervention group to whom we sent these forms. And what we saw is extremely interesting. On a period of around 1 month, we had an increase of plus 76% increase of screenings of patients who could be, the question was asked to patients. It doesn't mean that they were actually victims of domestic violence, but there was an increase in screening, and it was quite efficient simply by summarizing the forms and making it proactive. So sending it to the doctors on their email and asking them to do it. So these are very concrete examples. If we move to the next slide, I just wanted to say that we have many other examples of studies. They are all published, and you have various versions of the studies. You have one-page summaries, which can allow you to see the variety of things that we work on. And of course, if you're interested, you can go and visit them on our website, which is put on the next slide. And I thank you for your attention.
Mariam, thank you so much. As you say, echoing some of the things that Susan said there in terms of the need to be consulted early to avoid problems later on in the process, but also stressing as well the way that you work with a variety of disciplines. You've got people from a variety of backgrounds working, and you're part of, I think, which is interesting, sitting in that innovation unit. So part of that push for greater innovation, I think, in public services as well, working across all of those sectors, so all of those policy areas that you can be used in. And then really interesting, the two use cases that you touched on there. So the repairability of products. So actually feeding into maybe the green agenda as well, and seeing how that's shifted people's behaviours, both on the consumer side and the producer side, which was really interesting. But also, as you say, some very sensitive areas like the screening for domestic abuse, where you've been able to use this kind of approach to understand the friction maybe, or the concerns of doctors in that process, but also make it simpler for the citizen as well at the end of that process. And just to flag as well, because that might come up, the audience might be interested, both yourself and Susan have mentioned the importance of things like randomized controlled trials in kind of using that rigorous approach to test the effectiveness of this approach. Thank you so much, Mariam. And then Ivan, we're coming over to you now.
Okay. Thank you very much for the Global Government Forum for the invitation, and for your two kind introduction that Siobhan made to me. And my apologies for my Tarzan style of English speaking, but let's try to make me understand about what we are doing. Please, next, Raquel. And this is our unit in Argentina that is called Unidad de Ciencias del Comportamiento y Políticas, Públicas, or in the jargon that we use, it's a kind of traditional NAT unit. Next, please. And I dubbed this session a group therapy because here that we are all involved in public administration, it's a good place to think among us the blend of what we need in certain institutions of public servants and political appointees, which legal structure is better for our units in order to survive, taking into account that in all Latin America we have 3 or 4 NAT units, and most of them have been downsized, or in other countries like Uruguay and Chile, practically disarmed. So please, next. Here we have in 2021, in the midst of the pandemic, we've been able enough to set a unit at the center of the executive branch in the Casa Rosada, our White House in Argentina. And afterwards, there was a shift in the cabinet structure, so we've been moved to the economy ministry. Please, next. And we have some very strong support from IBD that have a very huge impact in all Latin America. But for us, it was a very interesting and strong support, not only economically, but also academic in academic terms. And the gold standard in NAT units around the world is the BAT. And as we have some contact with the UK, we've been able to establish a partnership to do some concrete projects, but also they guide us in the process of establishing our units. Then we've been very enthusiastic about setting an expert net, not only to work inside government, but to join with the consultancy sector and the academic world in order to work together. And we try to work some in-house projects, and we call for projects from outside government. Please, next. With the support of the IBD, they gave us $200,000, but to set 10 projects, perhaps in European or other parts of the world, it seems that's not a lot of money, but for us, having $20,000 for a project, it's a lot. So we set a process, a competitive process, and we have 10 winners with the various projects like Mariam or Susan spoke about. That's the great thing about behavioral sciences, this idea that not only there are carrots, sticks, and information to set public policies, but we have another tools that we use in behavioral sciences. Next, please. For example, one of the traditional initial movements for any NAT units is the tax collection authorities. We have in the first place, next, we have set a control group and a treatment group. They stand a way of practicing behavioral sciences that using RCTs, randomized controlled trials. So to a group, we use what we call social bias, and we try to convince people that a lot of their citizens, their fellow citizens, are paying their taxes, and we are not using the traditional menaces that we use for tax collecting, that we are going to threaten to kidnap all their relatives in order for try to have the tax collection on time. So with this simple change in the structure of the communication with the public using the social bias, we have these interesting approaches, and it's a useful example of our tools. They are cheap, and they are we can have a measure of their impact in a very precise way. Next, please. We also work with the tax authority. Next, please. In order to improve the usage of the web services. Now we use the social norm as we used in the past example. Also the loss aversion, how that's a very important tool for us to stress what are they missing if they don't use the in the web services of our IRS. So we have a very successful program over there. Next, please. Where we have our best partners were in the health sector, because they are very used to work with randomized controlled trials. In our administration, Mariam, we have a very strong French culture of this kind of rationalization tools, that we have this structure that we think. I'm a lawyer, and we usually think that what we put into the law transfers directly into the action and the public policies. So in some aspects, it's very difficult to, for example, in the economic sector or in the social sector, it's not very easy to convince that there are other tools to use. But with the health sector, we're very successful because they are used to think in this way of randomized controlled trials. With the vaccination program, please next, we use a chatbot where we use this method. We have a control group. We have another way where we stress the social effects of the vaccination program, and then we install a chatbot. We will use several behavioral tools, this loss aversion, the social norms, and the other very interesting tool that we use in behavioral science is that to make easy for the people to interact with government. And we have very interesting, we multiply almost for 4 times the vaccination rate in this province where we used, and now we are implementing this at a national level. Please, next. Here is how, even in when the vaccination demand is very low, we have a very strong impact, and that's the other thing is that we can measure precisely what we have done and what the impact was. Please, next. We try to use our tools also with the electricity bills. What you have on the left side is a website where you have 18 points where they have to explain you what the electricity bill means. So that's a problem. If you have to study what is in your bill. It's a very transparent way to see that they are not clear. So we try to clean the reading of our electricity bills, but also we use this social norm. We try to compare the consumption of each household with what we call the most efficient way of consumption and the effective consumption of each user. Please, next. We've been successful also in from packaging next, because we implemented it on a federal level, and the measure of our success was not only that we implemented this, but 25% of the producers that were going to be they have to use this frontal packaging asked for a delay in order to change their formulae to be not to have these frontal packaging labels. Next, please. So let's go to the end, because we are getting short of time. But the central idea is, on the one hand, we have these traditional aspects of behavioral sciences that, with the twists and turns that we have to make to adapt to our country, they prove to be useful for us, and they work, and we have the ability to measure that. The other thing is that we have to think about our institutional structure, and that's a good point to talk afterwards, because it's a common issue in the whole Latin America that when the government changes, our institutions are not surviving. And so let's get all the other stuff for the question time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ivan. And yes, just a reminder to the audience, please do get your questions coming in. I see Susan has already answered one that was directed directly to her. But Ivan, thank you so much for that. I love the way, I mean, part of these webinars is very much about sharing good practice and experiences, but also concerns with each other. And I like the way that you said this is almost like a group therapy session for people who are involved in the behavioural insights world. You, like Susan and Mariam, mentioned just a few of the areas where this approach can be used successfully. So you talked about child nutrition, sexual harassment, for example, but also focusing on tax collection and how that simple change in communication and a very cheap way of kind of changing a policy approach can have a big result. You also brought in a couple of the other things that people might be familiar with, or maybe in the audience they might want to know a bit more about, things like loss aversion or the use of social norms to change people's behaviour as well. But also I was really interested in the way that you phrased it in terms of sometimes our institutions, they get buffeted by those political changes and maybe aren't resilient to those. And I think for some people, especially if you have more impartial civil servants, maybe it might be more around, is this still considered to be something that's not mainstream, so that when the pressure comes on budgets elsewhere, maybe this is the first thing to get cut. The funding for areas like this might get cut. So maybe that's something we can come back to in the questions as well. But thank you so much to our three fabulous panelists there for setting the scene. I want to kick off with one question, and then we do have questions coming in already. But the first question for me is just, I have heard in the past slight concerns about using kind of behavioural insights in this, in that it might seem to be a bit manipulative, that you're kind of manipulating people into doing things they don't necessarily want to do or realise they're doing. So just your thoughts on what are the kind of ethical considerations you have to take in mind when using a behavioural insights approach. Susan, we haven't heard from you for a while, so I'll come back to you on this question of ethics.
It's an excellent question and a really important one. We do three things in Beta to make sure we are always acting in our citizens' best interests. And one of those safeguards we have in place is to ensure that every single piece of our primary research is subject to an independent ethics review. And we do that. One of our universities currently holds the contract for doing that. So that's a human research ethics committee within the Macquarie University in Australia. So we, even our surveys and everything goes through those ethics processes. So we're really strict about that. And the second thing we do is we're really open and transparent about the research work we do. So even when we first start a piece of research, we publish that we're undertaking that research on our website. And then when that research is complete, we publish it on the website. So those are sort of that ethical, open and transparency. And I guess the final thing we do is that we really carefully consider the impact of the projects we're asked to do. We're really here not to sort of limit choice or push people in one direction. We're about empowering Australians to support and inform their decision making.
Thanks so much, Susan. And Mariam, I'm going to put the same question. Do you have a similar kind of review process?
Yeah, it's a very, very important question that we've invested a lot of time on in France, to the point that we actually launched in 2020 and 21 a project in collaboration with the OECD in order to create a basis for a checklist, an ethical checklist, and a guide to have shared standards among all practitioners of behavioral insights around the world. You can find this report on the OECD website. So it allows two things. The report was co-constructed with all practitioners to make sure that the elements and the questions apply to all countries. It allows to, first of all, have questions at all steps of the project. Not only should we work on this project or not, which is very important, but also while you're doing the surveys, what are the ethical concerns of like asking maybe specific questions, or even when you're doing the randomized control trials, is someone getting a treatment that is unfair because you're doing an intervention on some and others are serving as a control. So we have very similar processes as the one that Susan mentioned. And what we have also is that in the projects where we're submitting something to citizens, they always have at the end of if it's a questionnaire or an intervention, the possibility for them to come back to us and to say that this was not actually, like, I felt that this intervention was disrespectful of my dignity, or I want to, and there's a number that's there like France Victime, where they can say I was a victim of something unfair. And so far we have 0 complaints, because we really put a lot of time and effort to make sure the process is as ethical as possible. The other thing that I will really insist on from what Susan mentioned is transparency and publication. So we publish every single piece of study that we work on. And right now we are having a big reflection on also pre-registration. So even before, and I think that Beta does that, if I'm not mistaken. So before even finishing the study, announcing that we're going to work on this is the method that we're going to use, and these are the approaches. One last thing maybe that I would mention is when the projects that we work on, the way we did it initially is we did a call for projects to ask administrations to submit topics that they think would be interesting for a behavioral approach. And in that call for project, we had several criteria. One of them was ethical criteria. So they had to fill questionnaire to make sure that they have an ethical reflection on their topic, to make sure that we accept that. And we got that reviewed by an external body of experts who decided whether yes or no it's ethical or not. So it's a topic that we take extremely seriously, and we have many processes in place to make sure that because one unethical intervention is the end of the whole unit. So it's a super important element to take into account, especially when you're doing trials in real life.
Thanks, Mariam. Ivan, feel free to add anything if you like on ethics, but there is also a question.
It's quite interesting this way, because on top of what Susan and Mariam said about transparency, about to be these pre-registration processes, the main idea is that we're not operating in a vacuum. All other government interventions has also some kind of change of habits and conducts. And the idea behind our science is what two of our prophets, the Nobel Prize winner Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein, they were very keen on stressing this stuff and talking about libertarian paternalism. Is that in the one hand, we are not operating in a vacuum. The idea is that, for example, in these front labeling processes, if the government does not intervene in order to suggest people what to eat, or how is how are the food, which are the contents of each product, is the private sector that is going to induce people with the marketing tools in order to consume these products. So we're not operating in a vacuum, and we have to be transparent. We have to be clear what we are saying. But the thing is that if the government does not intervene, other forces are going to.
Yeah. Thanks, Ivan. And Ivan, I'm going to stick with you because there's a question specifically for you. It says, when you talked about tax administration, which nudge tools did you find most useful in increasing the adoption of self-service tools such as web services? So was there anything in particular that was most effective?
In general, in the tax sector around the world, the most useful tool is to use the social norm, because people think that other people are not paying and their neighbors are not paying as they do. So if we have to be clear in this ethic stuff and not to lie people. If there is no good compliance, we are not going to use this tool. But we have to use the numbers in order to tell people that the others are paying, and not use the traditional extortion tools what we use for people to pay taxes. And there seem to be very useful, and there are proofs all around the world, not only in our countries but also in the first world country as well.
And Eric also asked, as part of his question, whether any of you know of any nudges that have been used to help people avoid falling for scams. So there are so many scams now that people fall there. So is there any? Mariam, you're saying yes, going to come to you.
Yeah. This is a domain that we worked on a lot, on consumer protection. And there's one study which we did, which is actually it's one of my favorites. It's a bit original and a bit different from the rest of the work that we do. So what we did is we worked on basically online scams. So mainly, all those dark patterns. Dark patterns are those things that the tweaks or the neuromarketing tweaks that maybe marketers use to get you to buy a product online. So for example, you have this counter that tells you, there's a countdown telling you that the offer will end in, let's say, 5 minutes, but it's a random counter that initiates every time you go on the website. So it's not really true. Or for example, you have these manipulations where you're like probably buying, I don't know, booking a room, and you see that 5 other people are looking at the room, and you feel pressured because everyone's going to get the room before you. So all of these are called dark patterns. And what we did is this big study a year and a half ago, where we designed a fake website for a coffee machine, and we used many dark patterns to make that coffee machine extremely attractive. So it's a coffee machine that goes temporarily from 300 euros to 50 for a very short period of time. So you have the counter, and you have the price that shows you that it's really beneficial to buy it right now, that many other people are looking at it while you're looking at it. And we wrote fantastic reviews of this coffee machine, and basically it was a complete scam. And what we did is we posted the ad for this coffee machine on Facebook for a period of time. And once people clicked to actually buy the machine, they were directed into 3 groups. One group to whom we told, watch out, this was a scam, and be careful the next time you buy an online, anything online. So it was kind of like giving them, at the moment where they were about to get scammed, giving them this information at a timely moment. The second group were directed toward a short online 9-minute course
video.
on training. 9-minute training in order to know how to find scams and get more familiar with these types of dark patterns. So it was like a training. And then the third group was directed to a page that gave them 5 rules, 5 heuristics, 5 rules to always keep in mind when they're buying online, to make sure that they check the HTTP secure in the search bar, to make sure that the specific mentions are on the website. And what we wanted to do is to see which one of these conditions will kind of vaccinate, I'm going to use this term, consumers, so that next time that they are scammed, they will not fall into the scam. And what we did is we emailed everyone 3 weeks later with a new ad for another fake vinyl and other fake things. And what we wanted to see is which of these 3 conditions will fall less into the second scam. And so very interestingly, we didn't get any significant results because we didn't have enough sample to see. We only had 2,000 people that clicked on the second ad. But we find a very interesting trend where basically the people who get the training fall less in the trap than the people who get the 5 heuristics, and those fall less in the trap than the people who just get the warning. So if we had more people and a big sample size, we could actually, I think, have really nice effects. But so we work a lot with the consumer protection authorities. We have many other projects ongoing, but I'll come back to those later. But it's a very, very big area for us, consumer protection. And I think behavioral insights apply to it extremely interestingly.
Yeah. Thanks, Mariam. Susan or Ivan, did you want to add anything on the kind of scam / consumer protection question?
Well, Mariam's example is excellent. I want to add another one that we had in Australia about add-on insurance. I don't know if that's what you call it in other countries, but when you're offered insurance that goes along with another product, like travel insurance when you book a flight, or extended warranty when you buy a TV. So what we found that a lot of these insurance products offer very poor value to consumers. Some have payouts of less than 10% of the premiums paid, which is really low if you think about something like car insurance or home insurance, which is closer to 80%, particularly in Australia with all our natural disasters at the moment. We conducted some research to inform some regulatory design around this. And what we found is that people were feeling really pressured by these high sort of pressure tactics, and it wasn't really understood that well by consumers, so they were just buying in the heat of the moment. And what we did a couple of years ago now was introduce a deferred sales model, and that requires sellers to wait for 4 days between the sale of a primary product and the sale of the insurance that goes with it. And that takes just the pressure off those sales tactics up front. And what we found was our most effective information statement actually reduced purchases of that add-on insurance by around a quarter, which is pretty good.
Yeah, fantastic. Fantastic. We've got lots of other questions coming in. I think we might have lost Ivan on the connection, but hopefully Ivan will join back in. I don't think, Ivan, you're not there without your video on, I don't think. No, I think he's dropped off. So we will keep going and hopefully Ivan will be able to get his connection back. But we've got lots of great questions coming in. I like the one from Chantel because, there's Ivan. Ivan, you're back with us.
Sorry, I had a glitch.
No problem, no problem. There are two great questions here. I'm going to take the first one from Chantel, which is very simple, which is, what is the public perception of the Behavioural Insights Units in your country? Do you think there even is a public perception of the Behavioural Insight Units in your country? I will start with you, Mariam, then I'll go Ivan, then I'll go Susan.
Yeah, so it's interesting because we've had, so our unit has been there since 2013. I've joined it in 2016 officially, and I see the evolution of the perception of behavioral insights depending on different things, I think. So first of all, one thing which I think is really interesting, and I think Susan touched upon this at the beginning, is this idea of nudge versus behavioral insights versus even evidence-based policymaking. And I think it's interesting that if you look at the history, the evolution of behavioral insights, and it has evolved a lot since 2008, and also because our models of human behavior have evolved, going from very specific insights from behavioral economics to integrating social psychology, and now to integrating more evolutionary psychology and more structural insights from social sciences. So it's important to take this evolution into account, and that units adapt to this evolution. So I see this happening, and I see that the perception changes completely, whether you frame exactly the same information, the same activities in terms of nudge, whether you frame them in terms of behavioral insights, and whether you frame them in terms of evidence-based policymaking, while it's exactly almost the same. Maybe the only difference would be that maybe the nudge approaches or the nudge examples that we have from a while ago, from 2010 to 2015, were very anecdotal. They were we didn't have that many examples. We had examples that were like changing a sentence in a letter, or changing putting a sticker somewhere, and these were a bit anecdotal. And I think right now in 2024, we have very good, solid examples of much more complex, much more nuanced projects. And this is what changes the perception of behavioral insights. In France, when administrations see the projects that we work on, look at the publications, see the type of activity, they're extremely convinced by the benefits of behavioral insights. And they see that it's actually, the idea there is to take into account the latest, most rigorous evidence and to test policy to make it better. So it's extremely convincing in itself. We don't need to go and use argumentation around it, because the examples speak for themselves. But it wasn't the case earlier on.
Thanks. Ivan, obviously you're concerned that maybe some of the new politicians don't kind of value this approach, but do you think the public perception of behavioral insights has changed over recent years?
Well, the thing here in Latin America is that our work is not well known. So that's the public is not aware that what we are doing. But the thing that our main struggle is to pick these low-hanging fruits in order to have some direct impact in the community, in order to have some gains that make you survive. But on the other hand, there are things you can't, what we used to call the hindsight bias, because if you see what happened in my country, well, we try to agree upon our policies with the main opposition party, but now a newcomer that is self-dubbed as a libertarian anarchist, they are not want to have any government intervention, so they saw us as an intervention, so they are not very keen in applying behavioral sciences. So the thing is, for us here in Latin America, with our weak institutional structure, the main goal is to have some concrete results in a short period of time in order to survive. And even though in these cases we were not able to continue, same as Uruguay and Chile. And now we have a very nice and strong unit created in Brazil, and we all hope they can last for more time than we've done.
Thanks, Ivan. And the irony, I guess, is you could provide solutions that didn't cost a lot, so right at the moment when they're needed the most. But Susan, coming over to you, your thoughts on the public perception of behavioural insights.
Yeah. It's a very good question, and I'd like to actually do a bit of a survey on this myself, because it is important. We have a very good reputation across government, and our services are sought after quite highly. We have sort of satellite teams in 17 of the agencies with small BI teams that we work really well with, and also in the state and territory governments in Australia. But we don't spend a lot of time promoting ourselves and our achievements. We have a line that the public can write in, and we respond to any questions. And there's some really good questions about how to do RCTs or how behavioural insights could help with this. But they tend to be not your average Australian. They tend to be scientists or people trying to do behavioural insights. So I guess we're very content that our work comes through in reducing the sludge, making services accessible, and that people are happy with the policy outcome that's been informed by our work. But yeah, I really enjoyed hearing Ivan and Mariam's response there, because I am actually very interested in that question. So thanks for asking it.
Thanks, Susan. Right, we've still got lots of questions, so I'm going to have to ask you to keep your answers relatively brief, because I want to try and get through as many of these as I can. And it might be that you don't all answer every question, but building on what you just said there, Susan, about creating accessible services, John's question I really like is, can you all share more about how you incorporate perspectives of marginalised or under-researched populations in the design and application of nudges? And is there a risk that you might exacerbate existing disparities? So maybe some people pick up the nudge more than others. Ivan, I'm going to come to you on this. This question around.
Great question, because we have a lot of disparities among wealth, and we are the 8th country in the world in extension. It's very great, and we have a lot of different approaches to the relationship with the administration and the population. We are working in the north with indigenous populations because they have several serious nutrition problems. So the great thing is that we have this kind of experimental and evidence-based approach. So you can't use internet services in order to implement a policy over there. So that's great, and it's a very interesting concern that he raised. And we are working on that, because on the one hand, there's the problem, if you use these kind of technological tools, you can deepen the disparities among population in our countries.
Thanks, Ivan. Susan, your thoughts on the equality?
I think he's answered it beautifully, so I'll leave it at that.
Mariam, did you want to add anything on that one? We've got lots of others coming in.
Yeah, maybe very quickly, just to say that in our structure, so at the Interministerial Directorate, there's a specific team that specifically works on accessibility and making sure that people that have any type of accessibility, barriers, can access any type of public service or any intervention that we do. So every time we work on a project, we make sure to talk to the team, to that specific team, to make sure that there isn't something we're missing in terms of proactive, the fact that the intervention gets proactively towards these specific categories.
Thanks, Mariam. Sarah sent in a question. She was actually one of the first questions to come in, and I really like this question as well. Do you take a different approach when you're trying to get people to change their behaviour for the greater good? So, for example, something that reduces carbon emissions, but it might mean a small loss for them, versus behaviour change that will have a personal gain, such as, for example, reducing gambling or better nutrition choices. So is there a difference there in the approach? Susan, I'll come to you on that one.
Yeah, I think for both those scenarios, you're trying to understand, the problem and the barriers and what it is that can help people make an informed decision. So, for example, we've used the sort of reducing carbon emissions. We're doing a big piece of work at the moment, looking at households and what it is that helps people make a decision. These big, complex, expensive decisions like purchasing an electric vehicle, which reduces emissions, or putting solar panels on the roof, or picking an electric efficient appliance over another one. So yeah, and so I think it's every time it's just understanding what the barriers are and trying to solve those. So in that exact instance, cost savings is a motivator in this current economy, but people do care about reducing net zero and reducing their emissions. And they just want it to be a lot simpler to help them make a decision. There's batteries and there's different sizes, and what do I need and how does that work, and so anything you can do in all of the situations to keep it really simple, to understand what their motivators and barriers are, and just give them the information they need simply to make those decisions. It applies in many situations, is what I've found.
Thanks, Susan. Mariam, do you agree with that, or do you see a difference if people are losing something or gaining something?
Yeah, I really like this question a lot. I think I even wrote it down on a notepad to give it a reflection internally. It's one of my favorite questions, I think, ever. So what's very interesting in the question is that we see that on the very important topics right now, for example, green transition, it's really very important to make sure that there's a perceived the perceived justice or perceived equality is important, because otherwise we are asking people to do things, all of us, to do things that don't have a very direct benefit for us, but that have a benefit that's long-term, that's not very tangible, that is for the greater good. So in those situations, I think there are a lot of insights from research on how to make the shared responsibility perceivable for the person, so that they know that they're not the only ones contributing, but that everyone is actually contributing. And it's the same thing for vaccination. It's also a question of maybe you're taking a risk, but it's for the greater good, and that equation is not easy to solve. Those are, I think, I would categorize them as most of the projects. I was trying to review all our projects. I think in most of their projects, it's not a case where people are losing something while doing. We didn't stumble upon this question in many projects, but in those where we stumbled upon it, we made sure to make it clear and very transparent what the benefits were for the person.
Thanks.
But I'm going to give it more thought internally.
Thanks. Ivan, your thoughts on this one, because it is a great question.
A great question, and with a I didn't have a clear answer on that, because we used to work with both worlds. That's that benefit person in particular, and the society in general. But I don't have a clear question. I'm going to think about that, because we use this. I didn't realize that we use the same tools for both worlds. So perhaps it's a thing I have to give a more deep thought.
Well, great question then. You've given our panelists, Sarah, lots of food for thought on that one. I want to go to Renato's question, because Renato asked, you've all mentioned tax collection and kind of increasing compliance with tax requirements, but do you have any examples of kind of behavioural insights that could work to get people to seek employment and actually get off unemployment kind of benefits, for example? So any work that you might have done on encouraging people to seek work in the first place. Ivan, I'll start with you on that one.
I have just sent a link to Renato, because the British worked a lot on that. It was one of the first aspect where they put a very strong attention on that, and it's not as simple as it might be, as you can see. But the British experience is what we are trying to apply here in Argentina, and we are working with BIT at the moment. BIT, for all of those that you don't know, is the Behavioural Insights Team. It's the UK NAT unit, and it's I think one of the most prestigious in the world.
Thanks, Ivan. And that's good for Renato because he's actually based in London, so he should be able to get more information about that. Mariam or Susan, did you want to add anything on the question of motivating people to seek work?
So we haven't worked at the stage of where you're unemployed and you have to seek work, but we've worked on a project where with young people who are already enrolled in a program to get help from the government to find employment, and why there's a drop-off in during the program there's a drop-off rate. So that's what we worked on more. And what we found very interestingly is that the first interviews that they have with the counselors that help them find jobs are very disappointing because there's a big mismatch between their expectations and the job market. And so we worked a lot on those first interviews and how to make those interviews more motivating, more engaging, so that they don't drop off immediately at the beginning. We have a lot of insights on that in a report that I'll share in the messages, but maybe Susan can complete that question if you have similar projects.
Yeah, no, we found very similarly the soft skills of taking an interview and showing up on time and looking $1 million were all very critical. But look, we've spent a lot of money on this in Australia and with very little impact. So it's an area that we're actually, our colleagues in Treasury, we have a new Australian evaluation centre called ACE in Australia, and they are actually doing a large program level impact evaluation of all those programs at the moment. So in about 6 months, I'll be able to answer your question really, really well.
Let me jump in with a very interesting question about methodology. We tried always to use, or most of the time to use RCTs, but there are in some aspect of public policy, you can't have this cleanness of these RCTs. In vaccination program, it's easy. You have a control group where you apply certain aspect of our tools, and you have the intervention group. But for example, in these employment things, well, you have to use we use some aspects of this for the health control from the children and the would-be mothers in some municipalities, and we use several tools. You don't have this paper style result, but at the end of the day, you have with several interventions how to make easy access to the health services, to send reminders, to use some social norms. You can have a result. You don't have this cleanness. I use that word as RCTs, but the results for public policy aspect, they are very useful.
Thanks, Ivan. Well, that picks up on something that Ethan had messaged in about, saying that he's found it's quite hard to get the right parameters to run a pure RCT in government. So any thoughts on using quasi-experimental methods? I think you just answered that nicely. And yes. Susan, I think you sent an answer to Ethan as well. But he also asked, so there are 2 questions left. So it was Ethan's follow-up question, which is what percentage of projects use survey methods and what other methods are used? So maybe if you want to answer that one, you can. But the final question as well from Alina, and I'm going to slightly rephrase this because I think you've sort of answered Alina's question already, which is, do you have any tips to have the public adhere to public health measures like mask wearing and vaccinations? So you've kind of covered that. My question, I'm going to put it slightly differently, is do you think Behavioural Insights was good enough during COVID? And if it was, why did we have to go down the route of kind of enforcing measures like mask wearing, for example, and kind of distancing? Why could we not just encourage people to do that? So you can answer one or both of those questions. So is Behavioural Insights good enough when it comes to a crisis? I'm going to put it that way. And then Ethan's question, if you like, on which survey methods are used. Ivan, I'll start with you.
Well, regarding these health issues, you don't have a silver bullet for everything. But what makes me feel more useful is that you have to try. In general, you do not implement a policy only with this rational aspect. You say, well, you put an incentive and it works. For example, where the behavioral sciences made a lot of mistakes in the pandemic, but on the other hand, some of the messages for vaccination that we use, they were very useful. So the conclusion is that you have to try, you have to experiment, and you have to see what's going on before implementing a full scale project.
Thanks, Ivan. Mariam, I will come to you.
Yeah, so I think that behavioral insights in the way that it's applied to public policy is relatively young, even though we're saying that it started in 2008, 2010. But I think that if we were in the same situation in 10 years, maybe it would do a lot better, because we would have consolidated many things. First of all, perhaps bodies of literature and of science that are more taken into account by by all public agents, even I mean, as early as when a public agent goes to a école, I don't know how you say that in English, but in a public administration school, being taught public behavioral insights can be beneficial in the way they make decisions even. And I think it taught us a lot about the way to communicate uncertainty, and the way that showing humility and showing that we don't know, because it's a new situation, we don't have all the information, is also extremely important for trust. So I think all of these are lessons, and I think that if it's to be used again in a situation of uncertainty, I think there's a lot of lessons that we learned that we could make better if we're better integrated in different administrations and ministries in a couple of years.
Thanks, Mariam. And Susan, we started with you, so I'm going to finish with you.
Oh, thank you. Just to add to what Mariam and Ivan have said, behaviours during COVID will be studied for another 10 years. I think it was absolutely fascinating. In Australia, the supermarkets cleared out of toilet paper, which was just a fascinating insight into what people were worried about.
Same here in the UK, yeah.
I know. But I think there is it was really challenging, wasn't it, during COVID with the mask wearing? I know in our country, don't wear masks, then you do wear masks, and then you have to wear masks. And the messaging was very mixed and challenging, I think. And then there was a lot of kind of misinformation coming through that was polluting the messaging as well. So it really was very interesting. But I guess that qualitative methods become so important in those situations where you need to respond fast and you don't have time to do these more quantitative research trials. And so learning from past experiences and testing things in the real world in real time is what we have to get a lot better at. But yeah, to answer the other question that you set around the percentage of projects that don't have such quantitative approaches, I say now that we start most of our projects with a qualitative analysis, and that's because data now is so excellent and you can do so much. As a very innovative example of something we just did, we're trying to look at why there aren't enough women in cyber roles, and we analysed a huge database with millions and millions of job ads with just some clever coding very quickly to just see what sort of gendered language was used in job ads and whether that was one of the barriers to women actually applying for these roles. But just, it's the sort of thing you can do now through machine learning so quickly that you could never do in the past. And to have access to all those job ads that are online and to be able to do that so quickly, it just gives you a really great starting point. And then you focus. So we start all our projects really in that a qualitative way, and then really use that information to design the more primary research work down the track.
Susan, thank you so much. On that note, we have come to the end of our conversation, and what a fantastic discussion that was. I want to say a huge thanks to the audience for sending in so many great questions, but thank you to everyone on the panel, to Susan, to Mariam and to Ivan. Brilliant conversation there. Thank you so much for lending us so much of your expertise and your time there. You all touched on the importance, I think, of communication. Maybe our next webinar should be behavioural insights in the world of kind of misinformation and fake news. That would be quite an interesting conversation to have as well. To the audience, we have sent you all a very short questionnaire. I'd be hugely grateful if you just spend a couple of minutes to answer that questionnaire, just so we can make sure we keep giving you the webinars that are of most interest to you. So I'd be grateful if you could do that. Ivan, I really wish you all the best in Argentina. I hope you find some way forward to keep all of this great work going. To everyone, we will send you a link of today's video so you can watch it all again or share it with any of your kind of friends and colleagues who weren't able to join live, and it will be available on the website as well to everybody to watch afterwards. But thank you so much. What a positive conversation. I think there's so huge potential for using these approaches going forward. Really important when we have all these big policy challenges facing all of us. Thank you to all of you. Thanks, Susan, Mariam and Ivan, and I hope to see you all again on another one of our webinars very soon. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the day wherever you are. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.